his photo is here.
I am here. How are you?
Evening,
wait,
David.
but on the other hand, Meg, are you just checking in, or is Deidre doing the, sorry, I said Deidre, and I mean Desiree. Is Desiree doing the minutes?
Desiree just logged in 1 moment.
Okay.
She called me earlier. She said she might be a moment late, so here she is. Well,
David, is there anybody else that you're anticipating is going to join us?
Just my dog Brock is sitting here with me.
And we don't get to see the photo.
Well, I can show you me if you want.
There we go.
Complete in front of the fireplace. I mean, you know.
Yeah, this is my
You've got-
serious background. It's
got
a
the
real
look,
background, just to mention.
All right, let's see. We have Desiree. So when
Yes.
Desiree says that she is ready to
Yep.
go, I think
I'm
we
ready.
can- Okay. It is November 10th, and starting the planning board meeting. All the planning board members are here along with Rick Golden. Desiree is taking the minutes, John Ledwith, and Mayor McFadden is going to speak with us about his thoughts on a proposed change to the zoning code. And then we have the opportunity to share our views on this. And he will ultimately take that into consideration and go back to the village trustees. I have shared with folks both in a prior village trustee meeting and by writing some of my thoughts. So I will go last in line after we've heard from David in terms of the other planning board members and their view on the suggested change. So with that, unless anybody has any other thoughts, I was just going to turn it over to David to discuss with us why he is pursuing this suggested change to the code.
Thank you, Joanne. Rick, you start to look like Robert Duvall.
I don't know how to
Especially
take
on
that.
Zoom. You look like Robert Duvall, a very handsome guy.
Oh, I'll take that.
Yeah.
I don't
So
think I've
I
ever
don't
been
want to
accused
sound
of
too
that.
formal, but I did write something up, and I'm happy to send it to you, Desiree and to Meg. Good evening, Chairwoman and members of the Planning Board, Building Inspector, Board Attorney. I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts with you this evening, not necessarily the one shared by the entire board. First, thank you for your dedication and service to the community, and thank you for your successful mitigation of the Overton subdivision. You came up with various elegant solutions, and it's good to see this tax positive project move forward. I don't know, Joanne, but I mean, I think this was going on when you and I both moved here, this project. Not quite as long as Tuxedo Farms, but it's been around for a while. Everyone that has served on past and current boards share the belief that our boards serve an essential purpose in maintaining the high standards of design and architecture that make Tuxedo Park a special place to live. I also see an opportunity to attract a new wave of home buyers and full-time and part-time residents of Tuxedo Park, whether it's the recent COVID pandemic or other reasons. We've had a lot of interest in Tuxedo Park. Of course, though, we compete with other gated and high-end residential communities in the tri-state area. We want to have a reputation of having a fair and reasonable approval process for applicants who wish to redo their driveways and paint or construct a new home. These home buyers want to improve their property, and we want to simplify their application experience and broaden our tax base. Now, there's always room for improvement. From 2005 to 2007, we made significant changes to the approval process. We created a bar and planning board. We assigned separate attorneys to each. We straightened out the secret process. We created a village building department and hired a building inspector. And of course, that was John, and Rick happened to be the village attorney at the time. We worked together on this. We approved a set of custom design guidelines for our historic community. We rewrote the village code to reflect all of the above. These changes reduced the time an average applicant spent before the boards for a new home from anywhere from 2 to 3 years to below 1 year. We've made significant process. The goal was to separate powers, if you will, giving site planning and subdivision and secret to the planning board and aesthetics and materials to the bar. One fault we made was allowing some of the site planning to remain with the bar. This has, in a sense, resulted in the bar becoming a mini version of the old combined planning board and bar. The bar reviews cut and fill, storm drainage, road cuts, water supply, sewer, erosion, retaining walls, and the associated engineering review. No, in my opinion, the bar should not be doing the planning board's duty. And it comes at the expense of timely aesthetic reviews and proposals when you're before the bar. While giving site plan review exclusively to the planning board results in the applicant visiting another board, which is a complaint I've heard and a cause for concern, the applicant will benefit from fewer and shorter meetings with the bar. The Board of Trustees has proposed changes to site planning responsibility because of a recent application by the club. I did not realize that this site plan application would go before the bar, not the planning board first. The code required it because it explicitly says that the applicant must go to the bar if the property has a building on it with a C of O. I propose to change the code so that all site planning goes to the planning board. Planning board members and attorneys are chosen because of their experience and background in land use, cut and fill, planning, storm drainage, road cuts, water supply, sewer, erosion, retaining walls, and the engineering reviewing that comes with that, where bar members are chosen for their experience and background in art, interior design, architecture, and high sense of aesthetics. The planning board also has the expertise to follow the design guidelines on the preferred location of attached garage or pool. By extension, the bar should only hire consulting architects to assist their applicants, and the planning board should only hire consulting engineers to assist their applicants. Now we run a hybrid where the same engineer serves both boards. Since introducing this local law to the public and board members, we've received constructive feedback from the planning board, bar, and BZA chairs, our village attorney, the trustees, and applicants that have made recommendations to improve the process. There's also been a call to expand the scope of the site plan jurisdiction law to include other things such as updating the design guidelines, sending minor applications to the building inspector for approval rather than going through the bar process, and other time-saving ideas. So presently, the trustees will keep this public hearing open to gather as much public input in your board members, but also members of the public before voting. I believe we're looking at a 6 to 8 month time period to gather this kind of information and write up a law that has everybody's support. So thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to what you have to say.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate the work on this this issue, and clearly there is room for improvement in clarifying some of the aspects of what should go before the planning board. With that, I would like to turn it over to the other members of the planning board. I don't know if people have comments, and if so, who wants to go first? Or we can do the,
Oh, pick
okay,
me.
Jay has got his hands up. I was going to say we can do the old school thing. So,
Thanks for coming to explain, Mayor. I mean, in general, I am somewhat in agreement with you, or mostly in agreement with you. I like the idea of the building inspector sort of being the gatekeeper of all this. And, I think there are probably a whole list of minor renovations kind of thing, minor changes that he or she, that position could approve. And then if it was beyond that office's scope, they could then steer the applicant to the correct board. I know that one of the reasons that the bar currently has sort of site plan approval on certain projects, and maybe it is too many projects, is again this idea of convenience. And I wonder if there is also a certain threshold. There are a lot of projects that really are a de minimis kind of site plan review. We're changing something about the building, but we haven't changed the footprint of anything. Doesn't seem like they should have to come to an entire site plan review to be told, oh yeah, you're not doing anything, no problem. So maybe there needs to be a threshold there somewhere. And that's what I got.
Portia, would you like to comment?
Yeah, so one question I had was, does this proposal minimize steps that people who are wanting to build will take during this process?
So right now,
Add to, that's
yeah,
where.
right now, if you're building a new house,
Mhm,
you would first go to the planning board,
right,
and they would develop with the building inspector, and based on the code, variances if necessary for you to achieve, but develop the footprint of where the house would go, plus all the things that we mentioned earlier, such as cut and fill and drainage and storm drainage, all that kind of thing. And then it goes to the bar, and it will stay at the bar. Usually there's a bar meeting before it goes to the BZA. That's what we're referring to with John steering the applicant. And I think, that in general it works well, and it's based on the code.
mhm,
And there's also sometimes working sessions where the applicant will go before the bar or the planning board. I don't know how often you do them, Joanne, but working sessions where you can come up with more, it's not formal. You can go and you can shoot the breeze about the applicant's plans. A lot of time can be saved there. Under the current law, if you have a house and you want to put a detached garage, because there's already a house with a C of O, you would bypass the planning board and go directly to the bar. Now, my argument there, in terms of not ping-ponging people back and forth, is twofold. One, that when you bypass the planning board and go to the bar, you're misaligning the expertise. So, the bar is there to approve aesthetics, and the planning board should locate the detached garage. It's been brought to my attention that the bar feels, well, the planning board doesn't have the expertise to determine where a garage should be. And so I said, well, what's the issue with the garages? Well, we don't like the doors facing the road. And I said, is that in the code? And they said, no. So that's one of the reasons I want to update the code. But there's no reason that the planning board couldn't make a decision as to where a detached garage can go. When it ultimately gets to the bar, they would only then review the materials, the colors, and so forth of the project. And that's their area of expertise. And the second part of my argument for not ping-ponging people and causing them to go to extra meetings is that the bar, they are not experts in cut and fill and all the other things I mentioned. So then you bring in an engineer, and you have very, very high expenses associated with that engineering review. They defer to the engineer frequently. And that's become a real issue amongst applicants we've had several recent complaints about engineers reviewing a variety of things that the bar essentially hands off to that. So the bar's comfort zone is not the same comfort zone as the planning board. So the second part of the argument is when you go to the bar for a garage, you have to do an aesthetic review as well as storm drainage and all the other reviews, extending that process at the bar to, let's just say, 4 meetings. Whereas you add another entity, the planning board, and give them full responsibility for site planning, it is 1 extra meeting, but now there's only 2 at the bar. So it's time saving. And everybody is approving the project in their comfort zone. A good example would be the site plan that was before the bar for the recent club application. It was a site plan without renderings, and it had 4 new road cuts, a lot of asphalt, a lot of storm drainage requirement, and a variety of other things. Then there was a small legend in the drawing from the landscape architect listing all the materials that were being proposed for the project. As far as I was concerned, that's the only thing the bar should have concerned themselves with. And as a result of that, the bar has approved things that may not cut mustard. For example, right now, the applicant has to come before the Board of Trustees for approval of removal of trees as well as road cuts and safety. And I believe the planning board would have caught that. So that would be another example. I guess if we were to have made this change in 2005 and 7, so that there was a complete separation of powers, not a hybrid, we wouldn't be sitting here because it would be so routine. We wouldn't have to revert back to our own experience. And in 2030, when there's new board members, they won't be concerned about this either if we were to separate them. So it's a great question. The issue of ping-ponging board applicants back and forth is the most sensitive issue. And I think all of us don't want that. I just believe that, you get it on the back end now by going to the bar, and it takes 3 or 4 meetings. If you separated the planning board, boom, they would do this stuff like this. This is their sweet spot. This is your sweet spot. And then the bar process will be cut down. People don't mind going to different boards, but they do mind being ping pong back and forth after they visit one board, then being sent back to another board and not knowing the process. So that's really how I would respond to that.
So Portia, do you have some follow-on questions to that?
No. Mm-mm.
And Rich? It's the old, you're on mute still.
Can you do an ask to unmute?
Yeah, I think he's working on it
Oh, okay.
because he has that, I am not happy, I cannot unmute, look to him.
Well, at least what happened to our board meeting hasn't happened here yet.
No, well, please. Is he going off to, so let's see.
All right, well, while we're waiting for Rich to fight with it,
Yeah, okay.
it's a little bit of a side issue, but while you're looking, while the board is looking, sorry, Board of Trustees is looking at related issues, we should look at the design guidelines and perhaps modernize some of the allowed materials.
Yeah, you must have been at the last meeting.
No, I just
Trustees. You're 100% correct. I mean, they've reached out to us to do that. We wrote them when Houston was mayor, after me, we wrote the design guidelines, and the materials are and rationale for some of these materials are over 20 years old, 15 years old. A good example would be the Rifkin House. They were hoping to use some synthetic materials, composite materials for this, to replace some of the wood. And it's accepted aesthetically amongst the best architects. It's used in historical residential property, but it's not in the design guidelines. The design guidelines call for wood. Now, one of the things that does, Jay, is increase the cost to the owner significantly in maintenance over the long term. So you are 100% correct. Roof ridge lines, we never allowed those, but materials now, it's almost a flat seam. You don't even notice it. So there, and we did actually make that change, but there's many changes that the design guidelines haven't been looked at in years, and they really need to be upgraded. Now, we went originally to an architect named Stephen Tilley, who lives in Pound Ridge, and we paid him to do the design guideline. And I mean, it would make sense to me to get him involved again, but with the expertise we have on the boards, that could be very beneficial to us. I mean, one example would be, and I mentioned this when I referred to the garages, and there's a recent example with a resident on Tower Hill Road. They were putting down white gravel on their driveway, and John stopped them and said, you know, the bar really prefers a more, natural color, gray, browns or whatever it might be. And so I checked the design guideline. There's nothing in there. That we need to take everything we've said to applicants and aggregate everything we've said to applicants in the last 5-10 years and put them in the new design guidelines. So an applicant doesn't go before and come in with white stones. Let's save everybody that time. So there's a lot of ways that updating the design guidelines, Jay, would benefit applicants.
So I think Rich has managed to sort out his challenges.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm all for simplifying the experience. I think the problem with Tuxedo Park, some people have taken 5-6 years to get a permits and approval for a house. The elephant I see in this is that the location of the house can be a key to the aesthetics of the neighborhood. So I don't know which way to go, but it is a question of to make the neighborhood more beautiful might go with the bar. So I'm just thinking out loud. No, I can't. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, that's it. Just the main point is simplifying the experience and also the expense. Because
Right.
I've been through it and I know what the pocketbook can, you need 2 pocketbooks sometimes. However, the location, I'm not sure if that's not a bar issue.
So-
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, respond.
No, I was just going to mention, you have your village code and you have John directing things to different spots. But to keep things neat and tidy, if there was a situation where there was a location of a detached garage and how that would make the neighborhood look, there could always be the applicant could always appear in a workshop for members of the bar and planning board, which is probably a good idea anyway. Or have a quick work session with the bar who would say, we think the garage should be turned this way. And so that's an informal meeting. It means there's been less of an expenditure by the applicant in final drawings. And that's a positive. And then it would go before the before the planning board for all the site work and so forth. And then it's on its way. So I think in general, we don't want to get too hung up on, I know it sounds contradictory, but we don't want to get too hung up on it if there's ways for us to cut corners in the front end of the project before the time and money is spent and an architect and their client have to go back and redraw things because they're being ping-ponged back and forth between boards.
All right, I have an open question here. What happens if someone wants to build a house and it blocks the view of the lake? That a house is already there. Where does that go?
Well, we have, that sounds like a ridgeline issue. It sounds like there's a geographic, it sounds like there's a house and then lower towards the lake, a height that's going to block the view. Sounds like it might be a ridgeline issue. And we have a ridgeline law, and we also have a view shed law, which would prevent any home being built in certain areas of the village. For example, up Tuxedo Road. Joanne was very involved in this legislature. So was Rick, I think. And for example, there's a lot right before you get to Tuxedo Road and Tower Hill Road that's for sale right now by a real estate company. And it's where the gardens used to be for the breezes.
Mhm.
And there was a fountain there. And it was recently, all the vegetation was recently cut down to make it more appealing to a potential buyer. But guess what? And I called the realtor and I said, you can't build there without a lot of, I mean, you have to disclose that to the purchaser because you're going to have a big battle, right? Because you're going to have to argue against the view shed law. And one of the things about the view shed law and ridgeline law is that there's no steps to take to mediate it. It's just go before the boards and approve. So in other words, if you're on a ridge line and you want to be right there on the ridge line, there's nothing in the ridge line law that says if you move 10 feet forward, you can do it if you lower your building height. So it's pretty wide open. But it sounds to me like that would fall under the ridge line, which Rick, where would a ridge line, or John or Joanne, where would a ridge line battle be fought, in which board?
Well, the ridge line is really sort of isolated to particular parcels. I think
Right.
Rich's comment was more general and would apply outside of the ridge line as well. But during site plan and whether or not it's being handled by the bar in some instances now, or the planning board, or if it becomes the planning board in the future, they are required to take into consideration under your code already, and in the proposal it continues, adjacent land uses, so that the board approving that would be able to have the authority to sort of move it in order to the greatest extent practical to try to sort of balance those needs of someone wanting to have a view yet blocking someone else's view in the context. So that balancing would be done by the approval board handling it, both under the prior code, existing code, and the new code.
Good
And,
question, Rich.
and I
Buy
can
all the
think
land
of,
around you.
yeah. Well, I can think of an instance, of course, now I'm gonna drop people's names, but a new house was built on Westlake Road, adjacent to the historic Japanese house. And the bar who was involved in that was very careful about making sure that it was sited so it was below the upper neighbor's view. I'm gonna take this time then to make my comments. And I think Rick had some sort of technical comments, but I agree that the planning board and the bar do have different skill sets, particularly vis-a-vis subdivisions and you know, the type of review that we did for the Overton project. And I do think that enough time has passed and we see that there are clear corrections that are needed to the law. So for historical reasons that don't really apply, in the case of there's this sort of hole that if there's an existing structure, a new house wouldn't come to the planning board. So for example, the house that is being built on Westlake at the foot of Mountain Farm went through the bar. And I certainly think that any new house and that involves a great deal of site planning and infrastructure, should come to the planning board. I also think that the examples of a commercial use, or an educational use, an institutional use, but I'm saying commercial and educational, those two should come to the planning board and be before us in terms of reviewing infrastructure. But, and I've articulated this, I differ with David about whether all site plans need to go to the planning board. Touching on the question that Rich raised, I think that the siting of a project is very integral into the what happens with a renovation, and that it is not so simple to pull apart how if you're changing the footprint, how that integrates, or even adding a garage, how that integrates with the overall architecture. And as I look at historical examples, I have not really I have seen I have not seen the necessity to have that site planning when it is something that is not a new house, is a renovation. I have not seen the necessity to have that site planning work come to the planning board. I'm repeating myself at this point, but I definitively think that if it's commercial, if it's educational, if it's new house, the trustees could specify if road cuts are requested, it comes before the planning board. I don't think it's necessary, but to sort of split the baby, you could say if you are extending the footprint of your house, you need to come before the planning board. I mean, I have seen a lot of instances where that has been done and done successfully and reviewed by the bar. I don't think you can pull the engineer out of the bar process. I mean, if you're renovating and you're doing those things, you're going to need an engineer in there, discussing whether the loads are appropriate or how things are being done. I just don't think.
Well, actually,
separates that
an
neatly.
architect would be responsible for loads as well, all structural matters. And it's not likely that you'd have to hire an engineer on a residential project.
I don't know about that. I mean, these are not the easiest. The easy sites are gone in the park. So I have certainly seen a lot of engineering involved in new construction.
Yeah, no, I'm not opposed
and I
to.
will tell you
Yeah.
that as the planning board, I mean, we obviously have experience, we have perspective, but we rely on our engineer. I mean, we are not. Jay is the person who has the greatest depth in that respect, but we are turning to the village's engineer, whom we see as serving both boards and relying upon their expertise. If we're saying, hey, is there sufficient storm drainage? Both the planning board and the bar are going to be saying, village engineer, what do you think?
Yeah. I also contend that the makeup of the bar, based on the skill set that you look for bar members, when they're faced with all of these issues of that would normally be under planning board jurisdiction in other municipalities. In other words, where the bar has to make decisions on cut and fill and storm drainage and all these things. The fact is, it's clogging up the works over there. It's costing longer review process. It's not their area of expertise. And they're relying on the village engineer to make all of those decisions. And it is super duper expensive for the applicant. So in a way, what I'm doing is I'm saying by this law, let me put this over to my experts over here. they're likely not even going to have to, necessarily have the engineer do a full review, probably a partial review, because this is your area of expertise. Then it gets thrown back to the bar, shaving time off the entire process, and most importantly, shaving big expenses to an applicant. One example would be that the engineer reviewed a garage door plan and charged the client. Another example is that a applicant applied for a pool and went before the bar. A neighbor complained about potential noise. 3 months later, they get an $800 bill from the village engineer who said he reviewed the letters, and that was the cost. So you have the tendency of the bar, which is aesthetic art centric, having to take on these projects is resulting in extra time for the applicant and extra cost. And then I have on the other side, the planning board sitting there, not meeting a lot because there's not a lot of action. And I'm like, whoa, we could solve this if we throw more of this over to the planning board. So that's like sort of a behind the scenes rationale as well of what I'm trying to do.
But I would talk about that pool issue, and I think it's very difficult to separate out the aesthetic issues from some of the technical issues. In that instance, had it been in front of the planning board, we would have, and I think that came to a good resolution. It moved to a less difficult location. But the engineer was going to get involved into that particular. So I guess what I'm saying is my perspective is site plan is very integral to the aesthetic process. As I say, moving more towards your view, if the trustees collectively felt it was really important, if you're expanding your footprint, and not just, you could bring it to the planning board, but I really feel that it is more that where this issue has played out has been new houses, commercial. We haven't really had to do much with the educational on the.
Right. I think we're on the same page on that. When we changed the law in 2005 to 2007, we maintained the planning board was to deal with all of the things that are required for a site plan approval, but only gave an opening where the house could go, allowing for the bar to locate the house within that chessboard. And that's what we're currently working under. So that happens. So the planning board could do the same thing with a pool. They could say, this is the drainage, this is that, the pool should be located in this zone. And then hand it off to the bar.
David, the difficulty is it's going to interact with the house. It's going to interact with whatever they're thinking about for the garden and the whole aesthetic picture. I just don't think it's that easy to pull apart. So I'll let Jay comment here.
You're on mute.
How's that?
Better.
I hit it twice. I was so excited. Let me put my town board hat on for a second. The town relatively recently combined the planning board and architectural review boards. That's not the discussion, but one of the things that the town requires before you can come before the planning board for a review is to attend what they call a TAC meeting. TAC is,
Right.
I don't know, technical assistance
Technical
committee or
advisory
something like
committee.
that.
Yeah.
And we could, as part of these changes, mandate that sort of primary meeting with not the full board, but a representative with the building official and a representative of the planning board, or a representative of the Board of Architectural Review, and be able to hash out a lot of these details. And if it was a site that had real siting, architectural siting issues, then perhaps there should be a mechanism where the BAR has more input on siting. Or if everyone looks at it and sort of says, it can only go one place, or it kind of doesn't matter because it's on the backside of nowhere.
Mhm.
Then they can wash their hands of it and just say, put it where it works with the code.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I see some sort of compromise based on your input. You're in the trenches and, you know, you have the hands-on experience. But it's been a great opportunity for me to share my ideas and explain why I'm doing it. Because the why is as important sometimes as the end result. But like you, I don't want to have any unintended consequences.
And I'm sorry, David, I probably.
No,
cut you off.
I was just going to ask Rick if he wanted to chip
I would
in
just
on.
like to make one
Yeah.
comment, and because Rick obviously sees other boards, but I would really caution against the slippery slope of having a representative of the boards do a technical meeting, because, you know, I mean, I've seen it, you know, within the planning board, you can get different perspectives. Within the bar, you can get different perspectives. And you have one representative and they sort of steer them this way, and then they get in front of the full board and they're like, oh, what do you mean? So I think that's a really slippery slope. I mean, my
Okay.
summation is I have not seen, beyond these commercial issues or new houses, I have not seen the current process not functioning well. So that's really kind of my
Well,
view.
right, because you're not involved, but on the bar
No,
side, it
no,
is
I
not
mean,
functioning well.
I track what goes through the bar as part of keeping, you know, perspective on the village. But I think it's time to turn it over to Rick, who did have some comments about if you
Yeah,
want to do
one
this.
last thing is, I'm glad that applicants have come forward, because people that have gone through this process have sometimes a completely different view than the board members that just approved them. It's probably one of the biggest bones of contention in the village, and we should hear from them and get their
I
ideas.
do not disagree. I mean, for example, the Tower Hill house, that was a tough situation. It was difficult because the applicant was looking to expand well above the limits of the typical coverage of a lot. And there was a lot of push and pull to balance what the applicant wanted to do, the constraints of the site, and the neighbors. And so that went on for a fairly long time. I don't think that would have been simplified or resolved had it, and in fact, that was a new house on a bare lot. So that was effectively the situation you're talking about. It came to the
Mhm.
planning board, you know, so
Mhm.
I point out that sometimes people are just building on tough sites. So I will turn it to Rick.
Okay, mine is mostly process of problems that I see in the way it's being set up, but it's also things that I think can easily be addressed. David, do you have the local law in front of you?
I do. I have the version that was mailed out to you guys today by
Okay,
John,
yep.
but it's going to take me a minute to pull up.
Okay,
Okay, so I have to download it now from my email. Hold on.
sure.
Okay, Rick.
Okay, on the first page under legislative intent, if the third full paragraph on the Village of Tuxedo Park architectural review shall serve the purpose of, and one of those things there is infrastructure, which is typically not architectural related. It's normally site plan kind of engineering stuff. So I would suggest taking that out of the kind of purview of generally what the intent is for the BAR. Another thing that I have is on the third page. And go to the top, the last
E?
sentence of that first E, was any proposed road cut requires approval by the resolution of the Board of Trustees. That sounds wonderful, and I think it's important because those are village roads and the Board of Trustees ought to have some role in it. The problem is that it doesn't set forth when that input is going to be. And if you change somebody's road cut at the end of a process, you may have to virtually start all over with site access and drainage and house placement and everything else. So
You're 100% correct. And that is an issue that we're currently facing.
I would suggest that when the initial plan is proposed, that
Mhm.
it be reviewed by the Board of Trustees to see if they have any objection to it.
Right.
And then it can proceed,
Right.
or some other process. But I think this has a problem in some instances if it waited until the end of the process.
I agree. And let's see, am I sharing my screen or not?
Yes.
I'm sharing the screen.
Oh,
Oh.
you're sharing it. Okay, I
Okay.
got so confused.
All right.
I thought you were.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm like, what do I have open? Okay. Thank you. Yeah, Rick, that's exactly correct. Right now, the club, the bar gave a conditional improvement to the club based on road safety and road cuts. And so if we don't approve, they have to go back to the drawing board.
Right.
That's something we're facing right now. I actually
And road
think there might
cuts
be a
is-
resolution, but yeah, that's a good point. Same with the tree approval. Right now, that falls in the lap of the trustees. That should come before the bar approval. So that we're doing too many conditional approvals.
Right. And just because of the conditions, I'm not necessarily concerned with a lot of conditions in a conditional approval. That happens all over the place. But there's a real pinch point for access, that so many other things on the site plan will depend upon access. And access depends upon most times, site distance issues and elevation, topography, things like that. And so I think, and it kind of drives everything else in a site plan. So if there's going to be a second review of it and a potential denial, I think that issue ought to be raised sooner rather than later. That's all.
I do agree with that 100%.
One of the main problems I have with the new system that's set up, and if you go to the next page, John, if you could bring that up again,
I've got mine, so
either way.
yeah. Are you on page 5, section 4, or?
Above section 4 on that same page 5.
Okay.
Go to the,
Yep. E.
no, the next page. I guess
Mm.
I was looking at section 4.
Below or
No, you're
down?
right there, right there. Okay, and what this says, if you read on the second line there, the Board of Architectural Review may review site plans to preserve that. And looking through everything else, there's nothing that requires them to review anything. And it also doesn't say when they shall review it. So it's almost as if there's this hidden pop-up that at any point, the Board of Architectural Review could say, well, you know what? I want to review that site plan, and this is what I want to review. And I think
Right.
that's going to cause a lot of problems. I think you sort of have to decide what they're going to review and when they're going to review it, not just leave it open-ended. And also, in connection with that, when you say later on, down below, if you keep going down that page, John, under section 4, it talks about the criteria, a lot of which was taken from, keep going down, John. Well, anyway, further down on that page is the criteria for the BAR. And a lot of it is taken from their current ones, and you have adjusted some of those. But there's still a lot of those that I think there's a lot of, you have these same criteria in site plan. And so if you have the planning board using site plan, and then the BIR reviewing that site plan for architectural, but also for things like location and dimension of buildings, screening. I mean, you just, there, those types of things are specifically in the planning board site plan jurisdiction. So now you have, there's a bunch of these, there's maybe a half a dozen or so, David, that you have both boards looking at the same criterion and always the possibility to going to come up with different answers, and there's no resolution as to who makes the final decision. So I think that's a problem.
I'll just interject. I actually have not, knowing there was going to be open periods, knowing this was a draft, maybe a failure on my part, but I haven't really focused on the wording of this at this point in time. But all the things you're saying are 100% accurate. And I would be more than happy to address those.
Yeah, they're easily addressed. I just
Yeah,
picked them up
yeah.
because I just
This,
see problems.
and this really is an area of your expertise, and it's just obvious. And you know, I would seek input from you on this, obviously.
Be happy to do that.
Thank you.
I think the only other point that I had right now, because I was trying to take more of a general overview on the process that, the new
Yeah.
process that's in place.
I just want I want the planning board to understand that what I said and what I want and was making a case for is not properly reflected in this, the way this law was drafted.
I figured that because there are things in
Yeah.
here that seem contrary to what you were saying.
Right.
The other thing is, if you look on the second page of the local
Mhm.
law, under B as in boy,
Mm-hmm.
it says all site plan is going to be handled by the planning board. And in addition, all proposed structures, as that term is defined, shall require site plan approval. Now, the problem with that is that structures is so broadly defined. It includes a gate post, it includes a fence.
Mm-hmm.
And previously, those were with the BAR because, you know, if somebody had a developed lot and they wanted to put on some steps, that's another thing that's in that definition.
Mm-hmm.
Then it made sense that that was usually in connection with an existing structure, and it was the architectural elements that would be important. But
Yes.
here, if there was just a lot that's going to have site plan on it, and now you say, well, all they want to do is put in a fence.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me odd to go to the planning board. for
Yeah, of course,
purposes
that would be
of
absurd.
Steps
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yep, that would be crazy.
So
So
those are the things that I saw that were problematic with respect to.
No, I appreciate that. I really do. I just have an off-topic question for you. One neighbor complained about another neighbor's smoke coming out of their chimney and affecting their quality of life. So I called the DEC and others, and there's really and I looked at the village code, there's really nothing about that. I mean, have you ever run across that, Rick, in your vast experience?
No, because normally obviously there are lots of things that affect everybody's quality of life. And certainly I happen to like it, but when my neighbor is using for heat only wood-fired devices, that's a strong smell.
Yeah, and that's what this is, actually.
Yeah. And I happen to like it, so it's not a problem for me, but
Mm.
there's no real way to regulate a lot of that without getting
Mhm.
into regulation of how people heat their homes, how they
Right.
desire to heat them.
Right.
And it's not really a pollution of any
Mhm.
significance from an
Right.
air quality point of view, because it's so minuscule in connection with the other air quality. And the air quality regulations by the DEC are really only when you get to a very high level of pollutants that are coming up.
Yeah,
So I've never run across it before, but I
Yeah.
think it would be just a real beehive to try to regulate.
Mhm. Yeah, well, thank you for that.
Well, so I think, David, you've shared your perspective. We've all gotten to share
Very
ours.
helpful.
If one other issue that's been on the planning board to-do list, but there have been other moving parts, including a pandemic, so we haven't dealt with it, is, but if you're going to be thinking about these issues, is blasting. I think we definitely cannot go through a long stint of chipping
Mhm.
and driving, the folks
Right.
crazy.
Oh, I see. No, this was a different pool, but now I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, and there were 3 different chipping jobs that were going on simultaneously, and only one of them was taking the
Mhm.
blame.
Mhm.
But I do think right now, this is an issue where applicants, blasting is at the trustee level, and applicants, would rather work with chipping so they don't have to do that extra level of going to the trustees. And I
I didn't
think,
even know there was that nuance in the code.
yeah, so that, I think, obviously blasting is more complicated. You've got to investigate the conditions of the neighbors, et cetera. But, that can be in certain circumstances a few times and done versus
Mhm.
extended chipping.
It
So
might be,
that is one where there's a bounce between the boards, which has been a deterrent to
We
applicants.
could clear that up.
I think one way to clear it up is in the provision that says that blasting plans must be approved by the Board of Trustee. You could say blasting plans and any breaking of X number of cubic yards of rock by any other means, because that's when you get into
Mhm.
chipping, and somebody like Jay or somebody could indicate the appropriate amount of where chipping of a relatively
Yeah.
small amount of rock isn't going to be a big deal, but after you
Mhm.
get over a certain amount, and
Mhm.
it's going to take you days or weeks or even a month or more of
Mhm.
chipping, that's, as Joanne said, more of a problem to neighbors than it would be a blast, which comes.
So, okay, so just to be clear, it's more beneficial in terms of noise and harassing your neighbor to do 1 day of blasting than it is chipping. And the code has allowed that workaround. So okay, I'm glad you're nodding your head. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely something we should put in. And over the next few months, it's open season on ideas. As I said in my conclusion, I want it to be a local law change that's encompassing as well as supported by everybody. And so, this has been very helpful to me, and I'll continue to listen. And yeah, I really appreciate your time.
If I can
Yeah.
just jump in with a couple of technical items about cutting rock, just because I know a thing or two about it. First of all, chipping and blasting are not your only options. There are other mechanical ways of cutting rock that are much less noisy. So, I mean, maybe a rock cutting plan needs to be submitted and then reviewed, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing is the issue with excessive chipping is a noise issue. And I think we already have a noise ordinance in the town. If I play my stereo too loud, somebody can come by and tell me to turn it off. I mean, similarly, you have to make allowances for the process, but we have a noise ordinance that could be used to help mitigate this problem.
Yeah, I have to refresh myself. Unlike the light ordinance, I think that the noise ordinance has a cutoff time of 11. And
Maybe it's
I don't know if it
one
has
of
a
the local laws.
decibel. I don't know if it has a decibel reading.
Yeah, I mean, I
requirement.
think that the challenge simply has been that because there was that extra step to get a blasting permit, people just didn't want to deal with it. So that was one where they were going to have to go to another board. I think that is a planning board question where, as Rick alluded to, at a certain volume, you know that it's going to be a long period of time. In the challenging case that we're talking about, a neighbor was highly resistant to blasting. So, I mean, that's another complication. But right now, I think that extra step of needing to go to the trustees, somewhat like what Rick was talking about with the road cuts, that just is, well, I'm not sure. Actually, now I started down that path. I'm not sure that analogy holds up. So I
Well,
take that back. But
yeah.
that has been something very much on my mind to have that capability, or as Jay said, other approaches, so we are not driving people nuts with extended
All right,
chip.
so when you and I talked briefly at the church event, you were hoping, I think, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, you were hoping I'd come back with a new draft of the law reflecting your ideas for discussion purposes. Is that accurate?
Well, I didn't know the timeframe that the,
Right.
the village
Right,
is
but
on.
it
I think-
occurs to me that your views, your board's views and your views would be better represented in a more efficient manner if you and Rick gave me a version, including the things that we just discussed, that I can present to my board and say, this is the feedback from the planning board. Here's another version of the law. And I think that's probably more efficient than other potential methods. What do you think?
I'm all right with that. I mean, I will come at it from the point of view that I do not think
Right.
all
Well,
site
also
plans
hopefully
need
you
to
come
come to
better
the
with,
planning
I mean,
board.
if there's areas for compromise, maybe you'll identify them. But also you and Rick going through this will probably find out a lot of things that Brian and I would not.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rick, this is his daily diet and not necessarily Brian's. So, we have discussed this evening, and I think we're all in agreement. There are clearly areas that need to be fixed and addressed. And so, I mean,
I mean, that's a huge step in the right direction.
Because
That's a big
we're
step
like
in the right
volunteering
direction.
you here, Rick.
Mhm.
What's your thoughts on this?
Whatever I can do to help, that's all.
Mhm. Terrific.
Joanne, Richard Whitty, I believe, has his hand raised.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, I just have a personal comment. I wanted to do blasting in my house because it was, less noisy and more effective than chipping. And then they said I needed a permit to make sure there was no rattlesnakes on my land. And when I investigated that, that would take a year to a year and a half to get that approval. So I only have 2.3 acres. So you're holding up the process of building for at least a year, if that's the way I was treated. So
I would think that's probably a DEC requirement that we're required to follow, Joanne, with the rattlesnakes. You just went through it with Overton.
Yeah, I mean, Overton,
It's an endangered species.
there's preservation areas marked off on those properties where they can't be disturbed.
Mhm. I hope it was just a matter of law and you weren't held up with that as some sort of lame excuse.
I did go to the chipping, which worked out. Of course, one of the neighbors, of course, said, please stop it.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough where somebody's building a new house at the bottom of the hill. I live up the hill, I'm a ways away, but it's a new house. It's gonna make noise. Anyway, thank you for
Also, just
sharing
the-
that comment.
Topography of the village is such that
Mhm.
it's not unusual to encounter rocks if you're going to do any kind of substantial excavation.
And also the lake, Tuxedo Lake is a big echo chamber.
Yeah, it is. So, assuming the rest of the planning board is comfortable with that, I mean, we certainly have perspectives and comments that have been made, and we can do a second draft of this.
That'd be great. That would be very helpful.
Okay. Well, I think Rick, what would you suggest? Just that you and I consult I mean, you've heard all the comments, or you take a first crack at incorporating the comments, or how?
I mean, I have no problem doing the process sort of things to make some suggested changes as to the process. But where you draw the line between it, it's really, that's a
Has to
substantive
come from,
issue.
come from Joanne. Rick, what do other municipalities do that have a bar and a planning board? How do they deal with it?
Most of them have it combined into one body.
Right.
That's how almost all of them do that. Not all of them, but almost all. And when you do have separate bars, it is normally restricted only to the exterior look of the structures being constructed. They don't get to sort of decide that it's visually a problem for other neighbors, or that it's sited here versus there, even though, as Joanne said, that certainly can argue that that's part of the architectural element, is where on a lot it is.
Mhm.
But most of the boards that are limited to purely architectural review do so sort of centered around the exterior look of the structures and nothing else.
Right. Yes, that's what I would like to see.
Well, you've given us an interesting project. So,
It's been a very busy, long day, I'm sure, for all of us.
okay, well, I will, I'll consult with Rick, do a draft, come back to the planning board to get its perspective, and then ultimately pass it along to the
Terrific.
trustees.
And,
Terrific.
Mayor,
Yes.
just to my own purpose, and it doesn't really matter which way you answer it, I'll still be doing the work. But should I be charging this to sort of a planning board general advice column, or would you like me not to be charging for it and just doing it for free?
What? No, I don't want you to do it for free. What is your agreement now with the bar? Are you on a retainer, or do you do the hourly, or?
I do hourly and normally, and it's always toward a particular application. There aren't that many times when I have general advice stuff, and when I've had it, I've just eaten the cost and not charged it at all. But this sounds like it's going to be a little bit more than that. So it's just asking. But
Yeah, okay, so
tomorrow.
tomorrow, give me a ring, tell me what you think the fees might be. And
Just give me a cap on it.
Yeah, I'll look at the existing budget and figure out where we'll pull it.
Okay.
But there's no harm, no foul in terms of, I don't think the planning board is on a tight budget with legal. They certainly deserve to have legal advice when they need it.
Okay, well, I'll do it under planning board general advice.
Okay.
And if when you get it, you think it ought not to be paid or cut back, whatever you want to do is fine with me.
Okay, terrific. I mean, it's going to happen anyway, whether it's another attorney doing it or you, and I just think it's more efficient and probably more cost effective in the long run to have you work on it. Not that
Very
I'm
good, thank
complimenting you, like I complimented you earlier, because you look like Robert Duvall. It's fantastic.
It's the first time I've ever heard that.
Yeah, well, it's a compliment.
I certainly don't act like him.
Well, I wish we were all so lucky. All right, so I guess I'll sign off then.
Okay,
All right, thanks again, guys.
All right,
we
good
still
night.
have to approve some minutes. And John, I am,
Yes,
I sent them out and I'm blanking out on the date of the minutes that we need to approve.
Joanne, do you need me for this?
No, we do not.
Okay, I have grandkids visiting, so I want to get home to. try
Well,
to see
go
them.
enjoy.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Great to see you.
Good night.
take
Good
care.
Oops, sorry about the phone there.
Desiree, do you have the
Yeah.
date of the minutes in front of you?
Yes, well, September 23rd was the last one that wasn't. July 8th was approved at the September 23rd meeting.
Well, we had one, I thought that you sent me one set of minutes that hadn't been approved that I sent out a second draft of, which I think.
That was the September 23rd one was the last one I sent you last
And-
week.
Mhm. And that still is outstanding, September 23rd,
Correct.
2020, right?
2021.
I think that's 2020,
Hold on, let me,
because I went back and looked. Jay had raised that question about,
Okay,
what
let me
year
go
are
back.
we?
let me go look.
It was just an overlooked Overton one.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, So I sent on September 14th, the draft for July 28th.
Now, this was September. I mean, I can pop out if I need to.
I
you know,
see one on my emails is September 23rd, 2020.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think, why don't
I'm
we,
trying to get it to open. It's not opening, so I can't,
all right,
but
so,
I know it was September 23rd, but I can't
Yeah.
confirm the year.
yeah, I
because-
went back and made sure that it was actually 2020, not 2021.
Right,
So,
because
and I think
you-
people,
Mentioned, it says 2020, but.
If you
in-
give me
Okay.
permission to share, I can put it on the screen.
okay? If
That's
John
fine.
does. So it was a second draft. I modified it somewhat.
If you're seeing my
Yep,
screen.
We're good.
Okay,
We're good.
I got you.
Okay, because we approved September 23rd, 2020 at the July 28th meeting on 2021.
All right, well then, let's just go down this because I made some, I didn't think we'd had approved it. Let's go down
because,
these
I've-
changes.
Okay, because if we approved a lot on July 28th. We
Right,
approved about
right.
one,
Because I
two,
just
three, four,
asked,
five,
you
six,
know,
seven.
send me what hadn't been approved.
Okay, you
Um,
did. And so it-
And
somehow or other. When I opened
can,
the
Jay,
July
can you
8th
just scroll down this? And let's just, hold on.
Okay, so on July 28th was when all of those minutes were approved. So then it would be, then it was the July
July
28th.
28th of 2021.
Exactly.
So I would suggest, and well, of course, we lost Rick. You know, I cleaned this up, but if it's already been approved, I'm not sure that it makes sense to reapprove it. Can you, yeah,
and I
Um,
believe that these items have been discussed at multiple meetings.
multiple times. So guys, we're just gonna, it's been approved. We're gonna leave it. And Desiree, if there are any unapproved minutes, obviously there will be minutes from this evening. And maybe the one prior really brief meeting. Can you send those to me?
Yes, I will. I'm going to send the 28th right now to you.
Okay, all right, well, never mind. So I wish everybody a good Thanksgiving. We started out just commenting. Now we're going to be crafting. So we'll see where we go with this. So I'll consult with Rick and get back to you all.
Okay,
Take care.
I'm sorry, just,
Oh, yes, and we have to
we need to
actually have
officially end the meeting?
Yes, that would be a good plan as opposed to
Okay.
just swooping out and saying, have a nice Thanksgiving. May I have a motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
I
All
second.
right, and thank you, Portia, for the second, and we are closed, and thank you all.
Have a good night.
Joanne, I just
Yeah.
sent it to you so you can confirm if you received it.
Okay, all right, not tonight.